Chapter 21. Wood. Richard considered calling the luthier to cancel his appointment that day because of his dream. He considered canceling everything. Richard had not thought about suicide since he was in the asylum, and nothing they had said there had convinced him to want to live. It was only when he remembered the words of their vow that he had decided not to kill himself. That was the only thing that kept him alive, and the only reason he had to live. It was because he had promised Michelle, "I will live my life to make you happy." And a promise to Michelle was more important to him than life or death. Michelle had also believed in him. Richard had thought often of Michelle's confident words between the two trees. "I believe you will become that greatest player in the world." Also, her simple response in the fortune-teller's booth at Salty Pete's. Even though Richard thought that Michelle was talking about both of their futures together, she had still used the words, "You will succeed," and it gave him hope. "She believed in me, and she was never wrong," Richard had told himself many times in the asylum. He may have failed her once, but he would not fail her again. And after that day, he had lived and breathed violins and music for her. Richard stood in his hotel room and shook his fist at the ceiling. "And I am almost there," he declared. Richard felt resolve building inside himself like never before. Dreams or no dreams, he would live his life and he would succeed for her. He threw open his violin case and pulled out the silver rosin holder. While looking at the inscriptions and pictures of Paganini, he announced, "We will show the world." Then he picked up his Bergonzi and played Paganini's 24 Caprices faster than they had ever been played before. As soon as he finished, he noticed that the sky was beginning to lighten, so he jumped into the Blazer and headed back toward the violin shop. Richard turned the cruise control on after looking down at the speedometer and lifting his foot off the accelerator for the third time. He fought the urge to press his foot to the floor while driving up the main street of Leeds. He was glad he did after passing the police car hiding behind the abandoned mechanic's shop. Even though Richard was going 7 miles an hour over the speed limit, the officer probably let him go because Richard was smiling. Once he was past the edge of town, he tore up the old dirt and gravel road and skidded to a stop in front of the violin shop. Richard grabbed his Bergonzi, burst through the front door, and headed across the entry. He almost tossed his violin on the table on his way to the back of the shop. And, trying to keep his voice as calm as possible, he asked, "Master Luthier, if the fans are turned off, will the wood still swing?" The luthier looked up from his workbench and smiled. "I see that you have been dreaming, Richard." Richard felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction flow through his entire body. He sat beside the luthier and let out a sigh of relief. "You see it too?" Richard asked while looking up at the ceiling. "I see a lot of things," answered the luthier. Richard gazed into the luthier's eyes. "I know that you see it. What does it mean?" The luthier laid his tools on the bench and stood up. "It means that you and your wood are now ready." The luthier walked to the far wall and turned off a switch. The wood hanging from the ceiling was gently swinging, and some of the pieces were touching against each other in the breeze, making a gentle clicking sound. The breeze eventually died down until the shop was completely calm. The air around Richard seemed to take on the atmosphere of a tomb, and a chill ran up his spine while trying to shake off the feeling of his dream. Richard watched while some of the pieces began to settle, yet there were others that continued swinging just the same, even without the breeze blowing through them. The luthier didn't say a word. Instead, he watched Richard. After another minute, some of the pieces of wood were hanging perfectly still, while others next to them swung freely, back and forth in the motionless air. Richard looked toward the luthier for an answer. The luthier closed his eyes and tilted his head back. After a moment, he began walking beneath the wood with the same expression that he had while listening to the spider. The luthier then opened his eyes and reached for a stepladder. After climbing it, he pulled down a set of wood that was hanging perfectly still. They were the same pieces that the luthier had looked at after Mr. Haito left. The luthier ran his fingers across each of their surfaces and smiled. "It is ready." After placing the wood on his workbench, the luthier turned the fans back on. The feeling of death and stillness immediately faded away. Richard stood spellbound. After all the years of torment and nightmares, the drugs and the therapy, everything he had questioned about his sanity was actually happening, and he had seen it with his own eyes. Richard was willing to believe anything, and he looked at the luthier with an expression of relief. He then wondered about all the other pieces of wood that had hung motionless when the fans were turned off. How do you know which ones to pull down out of those that stopped swinging? The luthier lifted the wood off his bench, lovingly placed it against the side of his face, and closed his eyes. In a soft and gentle voice, he replied, "Please."